What if the prayer Jesus taught in Aramaic was never fully given to you? Translations erased 3 words, not by accident, but through a process of deliberate omission that scholars have documented and debated for centuries. Those 3 words carried something that the rest of the prayer could not function without. They were the activation. They were the frequency that made the other words land in the spiritual realm instead of just the physical air. Tonight, something is shifting, because the people who were always meant to hear this are being gathered. If you feel a pull in your chest right now, that pull is the reason you are here. The prayer that was edited the Lord's Prayer is recited by hundreds of millions of people every single day. It is the most spoken sequence of words in human history. And yet, most people who say it have never stopped to ask where exactly it came from. Not the English version, not the Latin, but the living breath of the original. Jesus did not pray in Greek. He did not pray in Latin. He prayed in Aramaic, a Semitic language of extraordinary depth, where every word carries layers of meaning that a single translation can never fully contain. When the earliest Christian communities began transmitting these prayers, they were working across languages and cultures. The transition from Aramaic to Greek and then into Latin introduced something that most people never questioned: the quiet disappearance of certain elements. Not all of it was malicious. Some of it was theological editing. Some of it was cultural misunderstanding. And some of it, according to ancient manuscript traditions, was deliberate removal of phrases that carried practices, not just poetry. What scholars working with the Peshitta, the ancient Aramaic New Testament, have found is that the version of the Lord's Prayer world recites today is structurally shortened. The original Aramaic framework contained 3 additional elements that were progressively trimmed, first in Eastern Church traditions, then further in Western liturgical standardization. These were not decorative additions. In the structure of Aramaic prayer, they functioned as keys-specific sounds that opened the spiritual meaning of everything that followed them. This matters because Aramaic is not a translation language. It is a resonance language. Words in Aramaic were never chosen simply for their semantic meaning. They were chosen for the frequency they produced when spoken aloud, for the internal state they generated in the speaker, and for the precise vibrational signature they carried. When you remove 3 words from a prayer built on this foundation, you do not shorten it. You sever its root. You say the prayer, but the activation is missing. The circuit is open. The transmission does not complete. Tonight, that changes. The first of the 3 removed words is one that appears in the Gospel of Mark, and the moment it appears, something extraordinary happens. Jesus is brought a man who is deaf and cannot speak. He does not recite a formula. He does not place the man in a liturgical setting. He looks at him directly, presses his fingers into the man's ears, touches his tongue, looks toward heaven, sighs deeply, and then he speaks a single Aramaic word, Ephatha, and the man's ears open, and his tongue is released, and he speaks clearly, immediately, without delay. Mark 7:34 preserves this word because the gospel writer understood that it could not be translated. Other miracles in the New Testament are recorded in Greek. This one is recorded in Aramaic, inside a Greek text, because the sound itself was part of the event. Ephatha, which carries the meaning, be opened, be unblocked, be released into your full capacity to receive. It is not a request. It is a declaration of a state that already exists in the spiritual dimension being called into the physical. In the ancient Aramaic prayer tradition that preceded Jesus, the concept of opening was foundational to every act of communication with the divine. You could not speak to what was sacred while remaining closed. You could not receive transmission while sealed. Ephatha was the sound that shifted the inner condition of the speaker, cracking open the spiritual hearing, the spiritual voice, the capacity to both receive and transmit sacred information. It was not a word spoken at the end of prayer. It was spoken at the beginning. It prepared the one praying to actually be present in the prayer, not just reciting sounds into empty air. This is the first of the 3 words that was quietly removed. And when it was taken out, the Lord's Prayer lost something irreplaceable: its opening gesture, the sacred unlocking, the moment of true spiritual readiness. You are given the prayer without the key that was always meant to come first. There is a deeper layer to what you have just heard, older than the prayer itself, older than the manuscript traditions that tried to contain it. Those who feel drawn to go further will find the path in the description below. The second removed word is not a single word in the modern sense. It is a sacred Aramaic utterance that functions as a single vibrational unit, Enanura. Translated with the full weight of its Aramaic meaning, it carries something that no English phrase can render completely. It moves between I am light, I exist as luminosity, and I am the luminous one returning. The I in this phrase is not the personal ego speaking. It is the spark of divine origin within the human being asserting its reality before prayer begins. In the Aramaic cosmological understanding of Jesus' time, the human being was not primarily a physical body that had acquired a soul. The human being was a being of light that had taken on a body as a form of sacred descent into matter. Prayer, in this tradition, was not a petition from a small human to a large God. It was a remembering, it was a luminous, being temporarily wearing flesh, speaking from its true nature, back to the source of all light. Enanura was the declaration that the one praying had remembered who they were before they began to ask for anything. This phrase appears in fragments of Aramaic liturgical texts found in Eastern Christian monastic traditions, particularly in communities that preserved practices far older than Roman Christianity. Scholars who have worked with these texts note that Enanura appears consistently at the threshold of deeper prayer sequences, always before the sacred names are invoked, always before the great petitions are made. It was structural. It was not optional. It was the act of putting on one's true garment before entering the holy place. When this phrase was removed from the Lord's Prayer transmission, something profound shifted in the experience of those praying it. Without an Enanura, the person praying approaches the divine as a needy human. With it, they approach as a being of light who has remembered its origin. The quality of what can be received is entirely different. The circuit is entirely different. What answers a petition from a small self is not the same as what meets a luminous being speaking from its deepest truth. Some of you are already feeling it. The recognition that this is not new information but ancient memory returning. If you are ready to work with Ephatha and Enanura in their full form with the correct sound, the complete meaning, and the proper protocol of use, the path for you is already open. You will find it in the description. The third word, and the structure of silence the third, removed element, is the most subtle and in many ways the most powerful. It is not a spoken word in the conventional sense. Ancient Aramaic prayer traditions preserved something called the Shalath, the sacred pause, the intentional silence that was built into the structure of the prayer itself. It was not absence, it was presence of a specific kind. The Shalath was the moment in which the words already spoken were allowed to penetrate, to move from the vibrating air into the listening field of the divine, in the original Aramaic transmission of the Lord's Prayer. This sacred pause was positioned after the great declarations and before the petitions. It was the fulcrum. On one side of the Shalath, you had placed yourself in right relationship with Ephatha, opening you, with Enanura, remembering you. On the other side, to petitions, give us this day, forgive us, lead us not. But between the two, the Shalath, the held breath, the space that was not empty but fully inhabited by everything that had just been declared. When this pause was lost, the prayer became continuous recitation, words following words, without the silence that allowed any of it to land. The Shalath was not a pause for breath. It was a pause for reception. It was the moment in which the one praying became a vessel genuinely open, genuinely present, genuinely available to receive what the prayer was calling forward. Without it, prayer becomes a monologue. With it, prayer becomes a conversation. Ancient contemplative traditions across the world have understood the sacred function of intentional silence within prayer. But in the Aramaic tradition Jesus practiced, this was not a general spiritual principle. It was a precise structural element with a specific position and a specific duration calibrated to the frequency of what came before and what followed after. To restore the Lord's Prayer to its original power is not simply to add back words. It is to restore the living architecture of silence that gave those words somewhere to go. The question that must be asked honestly is this: were these words removed by accident or by intent? The historical record suggests something more complex than either simple carelessness or deliberate conspiracy. What happened was a convergence of forces, theological, cultural, and institutional, that together produced a systematic simplification of ancient Aramaic practice as Christianity spread into Greek and Latin-speaking worlds. The early church councils were not trying to suppress sacred knowledge in the way popular imagination tends to picture. They were trying to standardize a rapidly expanding movement across wildly different cultures and languages. Standardization requires simplification, and simplification, in the case of an inherently vibrational language like Aramaic, always produces loss. You cannot standardize the frequency of a word. You can only standardize its meaning, and meaning is the smallest part of what an Aramaic sacred utterance actually is. Additionally, visionally, the theological direction of early Western Christianity moved decisively away from the concept of the human being as a being of light. The tradition that understood humans as luminous emanations of divine origin, which made Enanura a statement of spiritual reality, was increasingly categorized as Gnostic and pushed to the edges of acceptable teaching. When you remove the theology, the language that expressed it naturally disappears as well. Ephatha survived because it appeared in a miracle account that could not be retold without it. The other elements were not so anchored in narrative, and so they faded. What we are witnessing now, in this extraordinary moment of global spiritual awakening, is a return. Ancient texts are being retranslated. The Peshitta is being studied with fresh eyes. Eastern Christian monastic traditions that preserved practices the Western Church forgot are being heard again, and people across the world, without being told, without being organized, are spontaneously feeling that the prayers they were given are incomplete. That something is missing, that the structure they inherited, though beautiful, is a house without a foundation. This feeling is not confusion. It is recognition. The chosen ones always feel what is true. Before they are given the words to explain it, 3 words were removed from the Lord's Prayer as it moved from Aramaic into the world's languages. Ephatha, the sacred opening. The unlocking of the spiritual senses before prayer begins. Enanura, the remembering of who you truly are, a being of light, speaking from its divine origin. And the Shalath, the sacred pause that gives all spoken prayer somewhere to land. The silence that transforms monologue into conversation with the living God. These were not decorative additions. They were the architecture. They were the frequency that made the rest of the prayer function as it was always meant to function. And for those who feel the recognition in what has been shared tonight, not just intellectually, but somewhere older and deeper than thought, this recognition is itself a form of activation. You have not simply heard information. You have remembered something. The Lord's Prayer was always complete. The complete version was simply not given to everyone. It was preserved in traditions that understood its power. And now, in this season of restoration, what was hidden is returning to those who have the ears to receive it. In the coming days, a complete guide is being released with the full teaching on Ephatha and Enanura, including the full meaning of each word, the correct way to sound them, and the complete protocol for working with them in your daily practice. Shabak is the key that clears the path. These 2 words are what you speak once the path is open. If you feel called to receive this complete transmission, guide link in the pinned comments. You can access it or pre-register now. The teaching is being restored. Tonight was your beginning.